Hi, this is Steve Sleeper, producer of the North Omaha History Podcast. It's a volunteer effort, but you can help us meet expenses by becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month. Go to patreon.com/Omaha. The list of patrons and the link to Patreon is in the show notes. You can also help by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. Thanks.
Welcome to the North Omaha History Podcast with noted author and historian Adam Fletcher Sassy. Each week, Adam takes you on a guided tour through Omaha's dynamic past.
Once a stop along Saunders Road as it meandered from young Omaha City to the old city of Florence, the intersection of 24th and Ames became a busy commercial hub in the suburban Saratoga neighborhood, with streetcars, pedestrians, and taxis packing each corner. About 60 years ago, it all started to change, and today there's almost no evidence left of its success. Adam shares the story.
Welcome to downtown Saratoga, Steve. You know, we've talked before on our podcast about the great history of Saratoga, about the reality that once upon a time there was a town of its own. It sat on its tightest boundaries. It sat between Florence Boulevard and probably the North Freeway today, from Sprague Street on the south to Saratoga Street and Fort Street on the north. This Saratoga neighborhood, that was really the core of it. It was all based around the school, the Saratoga Elementary School that was once at 24th and Ames. But, you know, more than just a school, Steve, the neighborhood has its own history. Its own history even separate from the city of Omaha. It's a fascinating place. We've talked about Saratoga overall, though, and I think it's important to really understand that the town wasn't just a glob of houses and lots of cool churches and some neat old history. Instead, there was a commercial success story that was painted right in the middle of it. You know, that story might have started way back in 1857 with a man named Euristus Beadle. Beadle was he was an investor who had come from the East Coast. He had a group of investors from the East Coast, and they were setting up these little, they called them wildcat towns. They were called wildcat towns because they came in wild and they just set up on the dusty plains. And believe it or not, there was a time when 24th and Ames sat in the middle of a wide open dusty plain. You can imagine the prairie just rolling across that whole area. Kind of felt a little bit more like a savanna. There were cottonwood trees that went along the creeks. There was a creek right by 24th and Ames at that point. This little creek had a mill on it that they built in 1857. There was a brewery down the way at 16th and Commercial Avenue at the end of this creek where it flowed towards the Missouri River. Remember, the Missouri River at that point, Steve, that was Carter Lake, because the Carter Lake flood didn't happen until 1877. But this intersection, this 24th and Ames, was the hotbed. It was the center point. It was the most important place for this town of Saratoga. Saratoga was drawing in farmers from way out west in the town of West Saratoga, little community. It was at 42nd and Grand. Now we call it the Central Park neighborhood. But that was West Saratoga, and there were farms all around out there, and the farmers brought in their goods to sell right at the intersection of 24th and Ames at one of the 9 grocery stores in the history of 24th and Ames. There was another little town to the east. It was called Sulphur Springs. It wasn't really a town. It was a loading dock. But there were warehouses, a blacksmith, a couple of dusty bars where these men would go and they'd unload the steamships that pulled along the river to unload at Saratoga, and then they'd go and hang out in the tavern. There was an old road. You got to remember, everything's dusty in this story, Steve. There was an old road that went along from Omaha. It was called the Winter Quarters Road. Then it was called the Florence Road, and then it became, in the 1890s, it became Florence Boulevard. But that road cut north just east of 24th and Ames. And as it cut north, the traffic veered off to 24th and Ames. Starting in the 1860s, they would find a hotel just north of 24th and Ames at 24th and Grand And that hotel had a couple different names, but eventually it became the Saratoga Hotel. Then in the 1890s, a new building was built for it at the corner, on the northwest corner of 24th and Ames, for the Saratoga Hotel. A pharmacy moved into the first floor. It was the Lane Drug eventually. Originally it was the Saratoga Pharmacy. Then it was Lane Drug. Lots of people know that name. They remember what that looked like. Right there at 24th and Ames. There were churches that were starting to spring up around this intersection because as the houses filled in on the northwest, northeast, and southwest corners around the intersection, churches had to move in too. The Saratoga Congregational Church was started in the 1870s at 25th and Ames on the southwest corner. It was a beautiful little building, not a big church at all, but a nice little building with a very stout structure. They talk about massing. There was lots of good massing on. It was wood clad, had large stained glass window in the front, and a little bell tower. Not more than a half story itself. But eventually the Saratoga Congregational Church at 25th and Ames became Trinity Lutheran Church from the 1890s until 1914 when they opened up their own edifice up at 30th and Hedrick that still stands today. But that building at 25th and Ames eventually became the North Branch of the Omaha Public Library, and it stood there until 1938 when they built a new branch over at 29th and Ames. Interesting thing, that corner, 24th and Ames, on the southeast corner was a long time landmark. It had a whole bunch of different names. It was called the Omaha Driving Park. It was called the Saratoga Racetrack. It was called the Douglas County Fairgrounds. It opened around 1866. It was a gigantic space with a huge oval track that ran a mile long. Today we can almost trace it north, just south of Commercial Avenue and west of 24th Street. That oval track had grandstands, had paddocks for the horses to saunter in and roam in. It had stables. It even had hotels that served it over on 16th. That horse track brought in racers from around the Midwest. It brought in fans from Omaha, Lincoln, and all the towns in between on the railroad that ran right next to it. That railroad was called the Omaha Beltline. It was owned by the Missouri Pacific Railroad. The Beltline ran all the way around North Omaha, it ran in South Omaha, it ran downtown, started at the Webster Street Station at 16th and Webster. It came all the way north to Saratoga and ran just south of 24th and Ames. It started as a pedestrian line. It was to haul passengers all around the community. When the railroad discovered that that wasn't necessarily a needed service, they decided to go ahead and switch it to industrial uses. And they seeded the Industrial Revolution that ended up taking over Saratoga. We'll get to that in just a minute, but first let's finish talking about the Omaha Driving Park at 24th and Ames. The Omaha Driving Park operated all the way until 1904, right in the 1900s there, the first decade. It went from having buggy races and horse races. It was the home to the first professional performance of Buffalo Bill Wild West Show. The Great Omaha Wild West was performed right there by Buffalo Bill for the very first time for paying customers. They came up on the railroad. They watched the performance for the day. They went to the bars and the taverns and the restaurants that were at 24th and Ames because by the 1870s when he did that, the whole corner was very mature by then. There was a vaudeville just south of 24th and Ames, right along 24th Street. There were multiple taverns and bars. There was a hotel. Aside from the Saratoga Hotel, there was another place right there that had boarders called the Grand Hotel. There were all kinds of things right at this intersection of 24th and Ames. In the 1890s, in the early 1890s, a man named Thomas Stroud brought his invention to the community and built up a gigantic warehouse right at 24th and Ames. No, he was just to the east a little bit, actually, at 24th and Florence Boulevard, or Florence Boulevard and Ames Avenue, I'm sorry. But when he built up his warehouse there, he started manufacturing what was called the Little Red Wagon. Thomas Stroud's Little Red Wagon was a road grading machine. It was the first of its kind in the entire world. Now imagine this thing pulled by mules, big dray mules, and they pulled it along, and the job of this wagon was to dump gravel, basically. It was a dumper. But it was the first one of its kind in the world. And Thomas Stroud manufactured those right near 24th and Ames. They were shipped around the world. First on the Beltline owned by the Missouri Pacific, then on the Missouri Pacific, then to the Union Pacific, then to the West Coast, and he actually sold models of the Little Red Wagon in China that were built in North Omaha. He sold models of the Little Red Wagon in France that were built in North Omaha, right at 24th and Ames. In 1898, the intersection of 24th and Ames was a red-hot facility for the nearby Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition. That's right, that gigantic World's Fair type of event that brought 2.5 million visitors to North Omaha. Happened right south and east of 24th and Ames. Gigantic, beautiful Grecian-style staff buildings. They were temporary buildings that were built just for art exhibits and industrial exhibits and commercial exhibits and all kinds of good stuff, Steve. And these buildings went on for acres and acres. Hundreds of acres were involved. And 24th and Ames boomed because of it. The boarding house was always full. The hotel was packed to the peak. And that was in 1898. The next year, the Omaha and Council Bluffs Street Railway Company built a gigantic streetcar barn right on the southeast corner of 24th and Ames. This gigantic streetcar barn was their main facility for far north Omaha. It's where they stored the cars at night. It's where they shined them up for the day. That's where they repaired and lubricated and just kept them going in tip-top shape from the 1899 when the streetcar barn was built until the 1955 permanent shutdown of the Omaha streetcar system. That barn was a gigantic, beautiful edifice that took up its space and really made an impression on everybody on that corner. That intersection was packed with business because of the Omaha and Council Bluffs Street Railway Company streetcar barn. There was a restaurant next to it called LaRue's. The same man, William LaRue, had a barber shop. And then next to that, there was a car dealer that sold exotic British cars right at 24th and Ames. Across the street, on the northeast corner, was its own fascinating little edifice. The northeast corner of 24th and Ames was first home to the Saratoga School in the 1860s. By the 1880s, that building was gone, and a new facility moved in right at the turn of the millennium, at the turn of the century in 1900. It was called the YMCA Athletic Park. And the YMCA Athletic Park was right at 24th and Ames on the northeast corner. Gigantic facility that had its own racetrack, that had its own grandstands, all for sports, all run by the YMCA. That was there for less, though. That had moved up from the near north side, and then it moved out of the community entirely into South Omaha. A school was built in its place, the new Saratoga School, but instead of being located on that corner, it was located over at 24th and Meredith, just north of Ames. On the northeast corner, a grocery store was built. And this grocery store still stands today. Now, not a lot of people know that, and I'm going to explain it more in just a minute. But first, I want to get back to the school. This old school building was a brick building, a 2-story brick monster that had 8 classrooms in it and housed a lot of students. But for a minute, it wasn't used at all. While it sat empty, the Omaha University took it over. That's right, Steve. Omaha University was founded down at 24th and Evans Street in 1906 at the former Reddick Mansion. but they needed more space. So they took over the third Saratoga school and operated there the University of Omaha Science Department from 1917 to 1927. It was located right there at 24th and Ames. Behind the building was a gigantic field that used to be the YMCA Athletic Park, and that was used as the Omaha University football team field. That's right. OU played right there at 24th and Ames for more than a decade. An amazing place. New grandstands built, and the community worked really hard to keep the university super happy and there in place. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the story of the Druid Hall built in 1915, just off of 24th and Ames. I'd be remiss because, Steve, it still stands today. It is the very last of the commercial structures of the buildings of the fantastic 24th and Ames. It's the last one that stands. We'll come to it in just a minute. Because I think it's important to keep telling the story. The story of how Lane Drug moved in 1898, and they didn't leave until 1970. 72 years of service to the Saratoga neighborhood by Lane Drug. 1927, Omaha Public Schools built a grand new structure at 24th and Meredith for the Saratoga School. That stood there for a long time. But that was after there were other big plans that were made for that very same site. You see, Steve, Omaha Public Schools had considered building Omaha North High School right there at 24th and Ames in the early 1920s. Ultimately, they ended up moving it. They first moved it to 31st and Ames and then went way up the street to 36th and Ames, where it was built and still stands today, the best high school in all of Omaha, via, how do you like the Vikings? Class of 93, what? But that amazing part about that neighborhood is that there was so much more to it than just its potential. There was its reality. Its reality included the 1920s opening of a movie theater called the North Star Theater at 25th and Ames, just off the main intersection. That theater ran from the 20s into 1950 when it was renamed, rebuilt, redecorated in this atomic space age style with lots of cool fixtures and far out graphics, and it was called the Ames Theater. It ran for just a decade, and during that decade, the theater lost some popularity because the neighborhood started changing dramatically. Now, let's not get too far into those details, because I want to jump back just a little bit, because we got to talk about 1938. You know, the Great Depression was real in Omaha, Steve. It took over a lot of things and did a lot of things. But one of the things that resulted across the entire community were works by the Civilian Conservation Corps of the Works Progress Administration of the United States federal government. Our tax dollars were hard at work rebuilding a lot of North Omaha. And one of the cool things that they did was rebuild the fire station. The Saratoga Fire Station had sat at 22nd and Ames for over 40 years at that point. And in 1938, the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, rebuilt it. At 2204 Ames Avenue today is the old Omaha Fire Department Station number 15. Built in the art, it was designed in the Art Moderne style. And it is a beautiful building. If you haven't looked at it lately, you should drive down there. Take a gander. Today it's a Dino storage headquarters. But back in the day, it was a fire station. It was the Omaha Habitat for Humanity warehouse for a long time. It had lots of cool parts, lots of cool functions. But a lot of these buildings have. You know, I mentioned earlier a grocery store that sat at 24th and Ames, where the building is still standing today. Yeah, it's still there. It was built as an independent grocery store in the 1910s, and then in the 1940s, a chain called the A&P, it was originally called the Atlantic and Pacific Tea Market. Then it became the supermarket A&P store. It was built in the 1940s. Then in the 1950s, Hinky Dinky took over the building. They ran it through into the 1960s. Today, it's part of a trucking company, and that trucking company has retained the historical Art Modern facade on the outside of the building. You could drive by and see the rounded edges, the white brick face, the smooth cornice across the top, and all kinds of beautiful features that hint at the greatness that that building was once. We're going to get to the sad part of the story in just a second, but first I have to mention the former King Solomon's Mines. at 25th and Ames. Oh, the building still stands. It has not one, not two, not four, but 5 storefront bays on the Ames front side. That's because at one point, those 5 bays had 5 different businesses in them. One bay held the entrance to the North Star Theater from Ames Avenue. One bay held an ice cream store. 2 bays held a Safeway store. The 3rd bay held a tavern. The 4th bay held a restaurant. Facing Ames at 25th on the southeast corner. Well, in 1970, that became the home of King Solomon's Mines, a phenomenal dance club that a lot of people have good memories about. Only open for 3 years, but really impacted the community. Today, the building's being used as a warehouse. You can almost imagine the grandness of it once, though. And the old theater building's right next to it, attached. They look like they're one structure. Amazing potential in that building. And then you cross the street on Ames Avenue, right across from the former King Solomon's Mines. And there it is, still today. The most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Nebraska is right there at 24th and Ames. A grand structure, Steve, that has more than 4,000 square feet. It has several club rooms. On the first floor, it's got 3 commercial bays. On the second floor, it's got a grand hall and some secretive club rooms for the Prince Hall Masons. In the basement is the original bowling alley from the 1920s. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's in rough shape. The whole building is. They need love. If any historic preservation people are out there listening right now, give some love. Let me know if you want to talk with the leaders there. We need to preserve this place. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but it needs to be restored. Now here's the sad part, though, Steve. That building's still standing, unlike its peers, its contemporaries. In the 1970s, the Omaha streetcar barn burned down in the early 80s. That old school was torn down at 24th and Ames a long time ago. It became a car sales lot for decades. And then in the 1960s cleared out, and the northeast corner of 24th and Ames has been empty since then. The northwest corner of 24th and Ames, it used to have the Saratoga Hotel and Lane Drug and a hardware store, the original Max I. Walker's location. It's all gone now. It's been gone for more than 20 years. There were other large commercial buildings, one that held the Metropolitan Commercial and Home Loan Company, another one that held an appliance store, another one that held the John F. Kennedy Recreation Center in the 1970s, founded by Beverly Weed Blackburn. All gone. On the southwest corner, there was a 2-story brick storefront that stood from the 1890s all the way until 3 years ago when it was demolished. And today, Steve, at the intersection of 24th and Ames, this once busy, once bucolic, once suburban commercial hub, there are no buildings on any corner. 4 corners of emptiness. There's no pedestrian traffic, virtually none. There's virtually no car traffic anymore in this neighborhood. And it's just a shell of what it once was. There are no historical markers, and there's really very little to see, except for what I pointed out here. Saratoga has a long story to tell, but unfortunately, the intersection of 24th and Ames shows what could be lost when we don't stand up for what matters. This has been a little bit of the history of 24th and Ames. To learn more, check out my website at northomahahistory.com for real details about all of Saratoga's history, all of 24th and Ames history, and all of North Omaha.
Thanks for listening to the North Omaha History Podcast with noted author and historian Adam Fletcher Sassy. Join us next week as Adam takes you on another guided tour through Omaha's dynamic past.